Welcome. So good to be with you on this Wednesday as we get together for a little midweek Bible study and devotional time. And I'm so glad you've taken some time out of your day, out of your week to join us to dive into God's word and hopefully be uplifted and encouraged and a little bit challenged by what he has to say to us. Have you ever been thrown into something or pushed or, you know, maybe walked into something where whatever the action was, where you were in something that you felt completely unprepared for. It could be a number of different things, but maybe just to set a scenario, imagine at work you walk into a meeting that you think is just going to be a little update, a little powwow of a get together, recap what's gone on in the recent times or whatever, and then go from there. And someone says to you, "Hey, just want to let you know, we think that there's this job that we want you to do, and we think you're the right person for it. And by the way, you start tomorrow." And you were completely caught off guard. And maybe, for some of you, you're like, hey, that's a great opportunity. And not to say that it's not, but for most of us, we'd probably be a little bit taken aback, right? A little bit stunned and say, hold on. What job? Like, what are you talking about? I didn't even apply for anything. And then maybe some real panic starts to set in. Maybe I'm not ready. Am I qualified? Maybe they have the wrong person. Is this going to lead to me getting fired? All kinds of different thoughts start going through our minds, and we don't feel prepared for the job that is in front of us. Whether we are or not, we don't feel that because there's so many unknowns, right? And it's just kind of a shock to the system. And I say that, and obviously that's not a perfect analogy for what we're going to be talking about this evening, but perhaps that's at least some of how the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah might have felt. In Jeremiah chapter 1, he isn't applying for the job, he's being called. He actually already has a job. He's a priest kid, he's the son of a priest, and so that in many ways was supposed to be his job, and yet God taps him on the shoulder and calls him for another job. In fact, God says this, not just taps him on the shoulder, but he says this to Jeremiah. He says, "Before I even formed you in the womb, Jeremiah, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." And like many of us probably would, Jeremiah immediately says, "Hold on a second. I know what you're saying, God, and I'm not exactly saying you're wrong, but I am kind of saying that maybe you got the wrong guy, right? I can't do this." But God, here's the reality. God doesn't ask for our confidence. He calls us with his authority and his power. He knows the plan. He provides the words, and he promises to go with us wherever he calls us to go. And so maybe today you might feel too young, too old. Jeremiah felt too young, but maybe you feel too old. Maybe you feel too broken. Maybe you're too busy. Maybe you're too unsure of yourself or the plans that God has for you, or too fill in the blank, whatever it may be. Well, here's the reality. You're in good company. And I think there are some important lessons that the call of Jeremiah can teach us about how God sees us and how he sends us long before we think we are ready. And the first thing is this: God's calling comes before our confidence. And Jeremiah didn't volunteer for the job. God told him, "Before you were born, I set you apart." And we often think God, that calling begins when we feel ready, right? We're fully ready and we know we're ready to go, but God doesn't call. His call doesn't wait for our resume or for our readiness. His call is rooted in his eternal purposes, not in our temporary confidence. What that means is that God's purpose for you isn't a backup plan or a reaction to your current status or your current circumstances. It is foundational. You were formed, just like Jeremiah was, with a calling in mind. And that means your identity and purpose are deeply connected. Here's the second thing: God's calling overcomes our objections. Jeremiah responds to God's call in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 6 by saying, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I don't know how to speak. I'm too young." It reminds me of some of the other excuses of other Bible characters that other Bible characters gave, like a couple that come to mind, like Moses says, "I can't speak." It's similar to what Jeremiah says, right? I don't have the words, and Jeremiah or Moses kind of says the same thing. Moses gives a litany of other excuses as well. Gideon, I think about him. He says, "I'm the least in my family. Who am I?" Right? Like I'm not even somebody in my own family, much less in the nation of Israel. But God's response to others, and especially here to Jeremiah in particular, in verse 7, he says, "Don't say I'm too young. Or don't say, I'm to whatever you want to fill in the blank, as I mentioned earlier. He says, you must go to everyone I send to you and say whatever I command you. In other words, God says to Jeremiah, Jeremiah, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about me. And if I tell you to do something, then I'm going to empower you to do it. You see, we often feel unqualified, but God doesn't need our perfection or our qualifications. What he needs is our obedience. He doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And that's exactly what he does with Jeremiah. And that leads to a third thing that we learn, I think, that God's calling comes with his presence and his power. God says to Jeremiah in verse 8, do not be afraid, for I am with you and will rescue you. And then in verse 9, God touches Jeremiah's mouth. That's a beautiful little part of the story, but he touches Jeremiah's mouth and he says, I have put my words in your mouth. I love that because God not only calls, but he goes with us and he gives us everything that we need in the moment that we need it. You may not feel ready now, but your readiness isn't the issue. God's presence and power with you is. And if God is with you, then there is nothing that you will face alone. And so if God is calling you, whether to serve or to lead or to speak or to step out in faith in some area or to whatever it may be that he's calling you to do or to go, you can trust that he will be with you and that he has already given you everything you need because you were born on purpose for a purpose. And I hope that's something you never forget. Hope you have a blessed day. God bless.